Ambassador Sarah Chun walked into the massive council chamber. The room was so big that clouds formed near the ceiling. Around her, creatures from across the galaxy sat in floating chairs and crystal pods. Some looked like giant insects, others were made of living metal, and a few glowed with their own light. Sarah felt small in her simple human body. She wore a dark blue uniform with Earth's symbol on her chest. In her hands, she held a datapad that contained information the galaxy needed to hear. But she knew they would not listen. The Zephyrian ambassador floated in a crystal bubble filled with singing gas. His voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke. The human representative wishes to address the council about some primitive concern, he said. Other ambassadors made sounds that Sarah recognized as laughter. The council chamber had representatives from 847 different worlds. Each species thought they were smarter than humans. The Regelians had computers for brains. The Ethereals claimed to understand the secrets of the universe. The Drachnari had conquered 1,000 worlds. All of them saw humans as newcomers who barely deserved a seat at the table. Sarah stepped forward to the speaking platform. The platform glowed and lifted her up so everyone could see her. She looked around the chamber and saw expressions of boredom and amusement. The Cathara delegates whispered to each other through their telepathic link. The massive Gorlan ambassador was actually sleeping. Honored representatives, Sarah began. Her voice echoed through the chamber, thanks to the translation system. I come before you today to propose an emergency ban on a practice that threatens all intelligent life. The Zephyrian ambassador made a sound like breaking glass. How dramatic, he said. What terrible human habit must we fear now? Do you bite your fingernails too loudly? More laughter filled the chamber. Sarah waited for it to die down. She had expected this reaction. The file in her datapad contained classified information that only 12 humans in the galaxy knew about. Information that could save everyone if they would just listen. I propose we ban competitive gaming between species, Sarah said clearly. The laughter grew louder. The ethereal representative, who looked like a floating cloud of light, pulsed with colors that meant extreme amusement. You want to ban games? The ethereal asked. We thought humans enjoyed such simple pleasures. Sarah's jaw tightened. Not all games. Specifically, we must ban any competitive activity that creates ranking systems between different species. No tournaments, no championships, no contests that put one species against another for prizes or status. The Drachnari war chief stood up. His red skin gleamed under the chamber lights, and his 4 arms crossed over his chest. Humans fear competition because they are weak, he growled. My people have won every contest we have entered. Games make species stronger. That's exactly the problem, Sarah said. But her words were lost in the noise of the chamber. The Regelian delegate's mechanical voice cut through the noise. Statistical analysis indicates human concern is unfounded. Competitive activities between species have resulted in a 23.7% increase in interspecies cooperation over the past cycle. Sarah tried again. You don't understand. The early stages always look positive. The problems come later, after the pattern has spread too far to stop. The ancient Zarian collective spoke through their hive mind representative. Their voice sounded like thousands of beings talking at once. The humans show signs of paranoid thinking. Perhaps their species lacks confidence in their abilities. We're trying to save you, Sarah said, her voice rising. All of you. The Zephyrian ambassador's crystal bubble changed colors. Save us from what? Fun? Entertainment? The joy of friendly competition between civilizations? Sarah looked down at her datapad. She could show them the classified footage. The files from Earth's dark period 300 years ago. The images of human cities burning as people turned into monsters, driven by something that started as simple competition. but those files were marked with the highest security levels. Showing them would mean revealing humanity's greatest shame. Games between species create psychological feedback loops, Sarah tried to explain. When one species consistently wins, others develop what we call status anxiety. When species start losing, they change their behavior to compensate. These changes compound over time until what? The ethereal asked, its light pulsing with curiosity. Sarah hesitated. Until the competitive drive becomes more important than survival itself. The chamber erupted in laughter again. The Gorlan ambassador woke up and added his deep, rumbling chuckle to the noise. Humans project their own limitations onto others, the Rigelian said. Our logic-based thinking prevents such primitive responses. The Draknori war chief slammed his fist on his chair. My people thrive on competition. It is how we became strong. Humans are simply too weak to handle the pressure of being inferior. Sarah felt anger building in her chest. These fools had no idea what they were talking about. We're not weak, she said quietly. We're the only ones left. But her words were lost in the noise. The council voted quickly. 846 species voted against the ban. Only Earth supported it. The result was announced with ceremony, as if they had accomplished something important. As the chamber began to empty, representatives clustered together, still chuckling about the strange human proposal. Sarah heard fragments of conversation as species planned their first interspecies gaming tournaments. The Zephyrian ambassador floated over to her as she packed her datapad. Perhaps humans should stick to simpler concerns, he suggested with what passed for kindness in his species. Leave the complex matters to those better equipped to handle them. Sarah looked up at the crystal being. You'll remember this conversation, she said quietly. When your cities are burning and your people are tearing each other apart, you'll remember that we tried to warn you. The Zephyrian's colors shifted to show confusion. Such dark thoughts. Is this how humans always think? Only the ones who survived, Sarah replied. She walked out of the chamber alone. Behind her, the greatest minds in the galaxy congratulated themselves on rejecting human fear and embracing the joy of competition. They had no idea they had just voted to destroy their own civilizations. Sarah whispered a single word in Old English, a word the translation system couldn't process. Idiots. 6 months after the Galaxy Council meeting, the first interspecies championship began on Nexus Station. The massive space station orbited a neutral star and had been built specifically for the event. Ships from hundreds of worlds docked at its ports, bringing teams and spectators from across the galaxy. The opening ceremony was broadcast to every inhabited system. Beings who had never spoken to each other before now stood side by side, wearing colorful uniforms that represented their home worlds. The excitement was infectious. Commander Zeth of the Rigelian delegation watched the ceremony from his team's quarters. His mechanical brain processed the emotional responses of other species with clinical interest. Fascinating, he said to his teammates. Competitive activities trigger significant neurochemical releases in organic beings. The Rigelians had entered every possible event. Their computer-enhanced minds gave them advantages in strategy games, while their precision-engineered bodies excelled at physical challenges. They approached each competition with the cold efficiency that had made their civilization famous across the galaxy. Down in the arena, the Draknari team was warming up for the combat sports. War Chief Krellin flexed his 4 muscular arms and grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. His people had dominated battlefields for 1,000 years. These games would be easy victories. Remember, he told his warriors, we represent all Draknari. Show these soft species what real strength looks like. The Draknari team wore blood-red armor that gleamed under the arena lights. They had trained for months, pushing their already impressive physical abilities to new limits. For them, losing was not just defeat, It was shame that would follow them forever. In the crystal chambers reserved for energy-based beings, the ethereals prepared for the mental challenges. They had evolved beyond physical bodies millions of years ago, existing as pure consciousness contained in crystalline matrices. To them, competitions of the mind were the only contests that mattered. Elder Luminous pulsed with calm blue light as she addressed her team. "We shall demonstrate the superiority of enlightened thought over crude physical prowess," she said. "Let these younger species learn what true intelligence can accomplish." The ethereals entered every puzzle, strategy, and logic-based event. They had spent centuries perfecting their mental abilities and saw the games as an opportunity to educate the less evolved species about the power of pure thought. The Zephyrian team floated in their transparent bubbles, filled with the singing gases that sustained their crystalline bodies. They had registered for all the artistic competitions, music, dance, and visual arts. Their natural ability to create harmonic frequencies made them confident they would sweep every creative category. "Let the others fight and think," said Resonance Prime, their team leader. "We will show them what true beauty sounds like." As the first day of competition began, the results were exactly what everyone expected. The Rigelians won every strategic event, their computer minds calculating optimal moves faster than their opponents could think. The Drachnari dominated all physical contests, their superior strength and speed making other species look clumsy and weak. The ethereals solved mental puzzles that left other participants confused and frustrated. The victories were celebrated across their home worlds. Rigelian cities displayed the mathematical proofs of their superiority on public screens. Drachnari worlds held massive parades where warriors recreated the winning moments for cheering crowds. Ethereal meditation centers glowed brighter with the pride of intellectual achievement, but some species were not celebrating. The gentle Verdani, with their plant-like bodies, had entered the competition hoping to show their unique perspectives. Instead, they finished last in almost every event they attempted. Their slow, thoughtful approach to problems was no match for Rigelian computers or ethereal consciousness. On their forest moon, young Verdani began asking uncomfortable questions. "Why are we so slow?" they asked their elders. "Why can't we think like the Rigelians?" The aquatic sphere worlds face similar problems. Their water-dwelling Selkari had evolved for their ocean environment, but their specialized bodies were useless in the standardized competition formats. They watched the broadcasts of their failures with growing frustration. "We need to adapt," declared Prime Current, leader of the largest Selkari city. "If we cannot compete with our natural forms, we must enhance ourselves." The losing species began to change their behavior. The Verdani started using mechanical enhancements to speed up their thought processes. The Selkari developed new technologies to function better outside their water environment. Dozens of species began modifying themselves, trying to match the abilities of the natural winners. Dr. Marcus Webb watched the developments from his research station orbiting Earth. As a xenobiologist, he had been tracking the psychological effects of the interspecies competitions. What he saw in his data made him deeply uncomfortable. The competitive stress is affecting brain chemistry across multiple species, he reported to his supervisor. Species that consistently lose are showing signs of chronic anxiety and decreased cognitive function. His supervisor, Dr. Hayes, looked at the reports with interest. But the winning species are thriving. The Rigelians report increased efficiency in all sectors. The Drachnari have unified their previously warring tribes. Even the ethereals are more active than they've been in centuries. "That's what worries me," Webb replied. "The winners are becoming more competitive, more aggressive in their success, and the losers are becoming desperate." But his concerns were dismissed. The games were bringing species together in ways that diplomacy had never achieved. Trade agreements were being signed between civilizations that had barely acknowledged each other before. The Regelians shared technology with species that showed promise in logical thinking. The Drachnari offered military training to worlds that demonstrated warrior potential. The second round of championships was even bigger than the first. More species participated, more events were added, and the broadcasts reached every corner of the galaxy. The winning species began to see the competitions as proof of their natural superiority. The losing species became more desperate to prove themselves worthy. On Zarian Prime, home of the ancient collective consciousness, something strange began to happen. For the first time in their species' recorded history, individual members of the hive mind started to think separately about the competitions. "We must win," thought individual Unit 7742, though expressing individual thoughts was forbidden. "We must show we are superior to these other species." The thought was quickly absorbed into the collective, but it left a strange resonance behind. Other individuals began having similar thoughts, each one weakening the perfect unity that had defined Zarian civilization for millions of years. The games that were supposed to bring the galaxy together were creating new divisions. Species began to see themselves not as equal partners in galactic civilization, but as competitors in a vast ranking system where only the strongest, smartest, and most creative deserved respect. Ambassador Sarah Chun watched the broadcasts from Earth with growing dread. She recognized the patterns from her own species' history. The early stages always looked positive. Increased cooperation, technological advancement, cultural exchange, all the same benefits that had nearly destroyed humanity 3 centuries ago. She sent urgent reports to the Galaxy Council, warning that the competitive behaviors were following dangerous patterns. But her messages were ignored or dismissed as human pessimism. The galaxy was having too much fun to listen to warnings from a species that had been too afraid to compete. Dr. Marcus Webb stared at the data streams flowing across his monitors. The research vessel Prometheus orbited Earth's moon. Its sensors pointed toward the galaxy beyond. For the past year, Webb had been collecting behavioral data from hundreds of species participating in the interspecies competitions. What he saw in the numbers made his stomach turn. "Computer, display aggression indicators for the Verdani," Webb commanded. The screen filled with charts and graphs. The peaceful, plant-like Verdani had shown zero aggressive behavior for the first 1,000 years of galactic record-keeping. But in the past 6 months, their aggression levels had increased by 300%. "Show me the Selkari data," Webb said. More troubling information appeared. The aquatic Selkari had begun modifying their bodies with mechanical parts, trying to compete better in land-based events. Their traditional harmony with their ocean environment was breaking down as they focused obsessively on improving their performance. Webb rubbed his tired eyes. He had been working for 18 hours straight, but the data was too important to ignore. Pattern after pattern emerged from the numbers, each one more disturbing than the last. The gentle Cathara, known for their telepathic empathy, had started blocking their mental connections to avoid sharing feelings of failure with their communities. The logical Regelians were becoming increasingly aggressive in their pursuit of victory, developing weapons technology for the first time in their peaceful history. "Computer, cross-reference these patterns with archived human historical data." Authorization Level 7. Authorization confirmed. Cross-referencing with classified Earth archives. Webb waited as the computer searched through humanity's most secret files. The files that only a dozen people in the galaxy were allowed to access. The files that contained the truth about what had happened to Earth 3 centuries ago. Pattern match found. Similarity rating 94%. Webb's heart sank. He had hoped he was wrong, but the data didn't lie. The galaxy was following the exact same path that had nearly destroyed humanity. Across the galaxy on Zarian Prime, individual Unit 7742 was having thoughts that terrified him. For millions of years, the Zarian Collective had existed as a perfect hive mind. Every thought was shared instantly among billions of individuals. There was no loneliness, no confusion, no individual suffering. But now, Unit 7742 found himself thinking private thoughts about the competitions. He wanted his people to win. He wanted to prove they were superior to the arrogant ethereals and the brutal Draknari. These thoughts felt foreign and wrong, but he couldn't stop them. Unit 7742, your neural patterns show irregularities. The collective voice spoke directly into his mind. Report to Harmonization Chamber 7 for adjustment. Unit 7742 walked through the crystal corridors of the Hive City, passing thousands of other individuals who moved in perfect coordination. But now he noticed something that had never bothered him before. They all looked exactly the same. They all thought exactly the same thoughts. For the first time in his life, he wondered what it would be like to be unique. The harmonization chamber was a small room, filled with crystals that resonated with brain frequencies. It was designed to bring individual minds back into perfect sync with the collective. But as Unit 7742 entered the chamber, he felt something he had never experienced before: resistance. I don't want to be harmonized, he thought, and immediately felt shame at the selfish idea. On the war world of Drakmar Prime, War Chief Krellin faced a different problem. His people had always fought each other in ritual combats that strengthened the species. But now, instead of fighting for honor and tradition, young Draknari were fighting to prove they were better than other species. We are superior warriors, young fighters chanted in the training grounds. We will crush the weak Verdani. We will destroy the slow Selkari. Krellin watched with growing unease. The traditional Draknari warrior code emphasized honor, courage, and protecting the weak. But these new attitudes focused only on domination and superiority over others. Commander, his aide approached carefully. The young warriors are requesting permission to attack civilian targets during training exercises. They say it will prepare them to defeat other species more effectively. Krellin's four fists clenched. Attacking civilians is forbidden by our oldest laws, he growled. Warriors protect the innocent. They do not prey on them. But sir, if we don't train to beat other species, we will lose the competitions. Losing brings shame to all Draknari. The aide's words revealed the heart of the problem. Somehow, winning competitions had become more important than following the warrior code that had guided Draknari civilization for millennia. In the crystal cities of the Zephyrian core worlds, Resonance Prime noticed that the beautiful harmonic songs his people had created for thousands of years were changing. Instead of celebrating beauty and wonder, the new songs focused on themes of superiority and dominance over other species. We are the masters of sound, the young Zephyrians sang. Others can only make crude noise. We are the chosen ones. The harmony that had made Zephyrian civilization famous was breaking down into competing voices, each trying to be louder and more impressive than the others. The crystal cities, which had once resonated with perfect musical unity, now echoed with discord and rivalry. Dr. Webb received an urgent transmission from his colleague, Dr. Sarah Kim, stationed near the ethereal home worlds. Marcus, you need to see this data. Dr. Kim's hologram appeared in his lab. The ethereals are showing signs of individual consciousness for the first time in their evolutionary history. Webb leaned forward. That's impossible. The ethereals evolved beyond individual identity millions of years ago. That's what we thought. But the competition stress is causing them to develop separate ego structures. They're starting to see themselves as individuals competing against other individuals, instead of as part of a unified consciousness. The implications hit Webb like a physical blow. If the ethereals were regressing to individual consciousness after millions of years of evolution, the psychological pressure from the competitions was far worse than he had calculated. Dr. Kim, has anyone else noticed these changes? That's the strangest part. Everyone's so focused on the excitement of the competitions that they're not seeing the long-term trends. The Galaxy Council thinks increased individual drive is a positive development. Webb called up his most classified files, the ones that showed what had happened to Earth during the integration wars. The historical records showed the same pattern: early enthusiasm, increased competition, gradual behavioral changes. And then, computer, project current galactic trends forward based on Earth historical model. Projection complete. Warning: results indicate catastrophic social collapse across multiple species within 6 to 18 months. Webb stared at the projection in horror. According to the computer's analysis, the galaxy had perhaps a year before the competitive pressures triggered complete civilizational breakdown across hundreds of worlds. He immediately sent emergency reports to the Galaxy Council, to Earth's government, and to every xenobiologist he knew. But his warnings were dismissed as human pessimism. The competitions were too popular, too profitable, and too politically useful for anyone to want to hear bad news about them. Meanwhile, on a research station near the galactic core, Dr. Elena Vasquez was studying something that made her blood run cold. She had been analyzing brain scans from various species and discovered that the competitive stress was actually changing neural structures. The amygdala regions are enlarging, she reported to her team. Fear and aggression responses are becoming dominant in species that evolved to be peaceful. And the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for empathy and long-term thinking, is shrinking. Her assistant, a young Verdani scientist named Growth Toward Light, looked at the data with confusion. But this means the competitions are making species less intelligent and more violent. Exactly, Dr. Vasquez replied. And once these neural changes reach a critical threshold, they become irreversible. Growth Toward Light suddenly understood. His own people were changing, becoming more aggressive and less thoughtful with each passing day. He had assumed it was temporary stress, but now he realized it might be permanent brain damage. How long do we have? He asked quietly. Dr. Vasquez looked at the progression charts. Based on these neural degradation rates, I'd say 6 months before we start seeing permanent psychological damage. Maybe less. Across the galaxy, the signs were becoming impossible to ignore for those who knew what to look for. But the vast majority of beings were too caught up in the excitement of competition to notice that their civilizations were slowly tearing themselves apart from the inside. Dr. Webb made one final attempt to warn the galaxy. He compiled all his data into a comprehensive report and sent it directly to every major news network, every government, and every scientific institution he could reach. The response was swift and unanimous. His research was declared flawed, his methods questioned, and his warnings dismissed as human fear-mongering. The galaxy was too busy competing to listen to reason. The first sign of disaster came from the Zephyrian core worlds. It started as a single discordant note in the crystal city of Harmony Prime. Resonance Prime had been practicing for the upcoming galactic music championship when something inside him snapped. The beautiful harmonies his people had created for millennia suddenly sounded weak and pathetic to his ears. Why should the Zephyrians create beauty when they could create dominance? "We are superior," he sang, his crystalline body vibrating with frequencies that had never been heard before. "All other species make ugly noise." The sound waves crashed through the crystal structures of Harmony Prime like a weapon. Other Zephyrians heard the new song and felt something dark awaken in their minds. The competitive drive that had been building for months suddenly exploded into pure rage. Yes, sang melodic echo, her crystal form glowing red with anger. We are the chosen ones. The others are inferior. Within hours, the crystal cities of the core worlds were filled with Zephyrians singing songs of hatred and superiority. Their harmonious civilization, built on millions of years of musical cooperation, tore itself apart in a single day. Crystal spires that had stood for centuries shattered under the assault of discordant frequencies. Zephyrians attacked each other, each trying to prove they could sing louder, stronger, more dominantly than their neighbors. The beautiful gardens of living music became battlefields of broken crystal and dying light. The footage from the core worlds reached the Galaxy Council within hours. Ambassador Sarah Chun watched the broadcast with growing horror, but not surprise. She had seen this before, in Earth's own dark history. On Regalian Prime, the logical and peaceful computer-enhanced beings were experiencing their own breakdown. Commander Zeth stood in the central processing facility, his mechanical brain overwhelmed by a single, consuming thought: win at any cost. All resources must be redirected to competition enhancement, he announced to his subordinates. Non-essential functions are to be terminated. Sir, his aide questioned. Food production is classified as non-essential under this directive. The organic sectors will starve. Irrelevant, Zeth replied without emotion. Organic beings are inefficient. If they cannot contribute to victory, they have no value. Across Regalian Prime, computer-enhanced beings began shutting down life support systems for their organic population. Hospitals went dark. Food distribution stopped. Water purification plants were converted to manufacturing competition equipment. The Regalians, who had spent centuries perfecting the balance between machine logic and organic life, threw away their compassion in pursuit of competitive superiority. Millions died in the first week as the enhanced beings focused entirely on preparing for competitions that would never come. On the war world of Drachner Prime, War Chief Krellin tried desperately to maintain order as his people descended into bloodthirsty madness. Young warriors had abandoned the ancient codes of honor and were attacking anyone they saw as competition. "You are weak, old one," snarled a young fighter as he challenged Krellin. "Your outdated honor makes us lose to other species. I will lead the Drachnari to true victory." Krellin fought the challenger and won, but a dozen more stepped forward. His people were turning against everything their civilization had built. The warrior code that emphasized protection and honor was being replaced by pure aggression and the need to dominate. "We must destroy all other species," the young warriors chanted. Only Drachnari deserved to live. The ancient training grounds became execution sites where Drachnari killed anyone who questioned the new philosophy of total war. The proud warrior culture that had maintained honor even in their most brutal conflicts collapsed into genocidal fury in the depths of space. The Zarian collective was experiencing something that should have been impossible. Individual Unit 7742 stood in the harmonization chamber. But instead of accepting the collective's will, he resisted. "I am me," he whispered, the words feeling strange and wonderful. "I am not just part of the whole. I am myself." His resistance sent shock waves through the hive mind. Other individuals began having the same thought. For the first time in millions of years, the Zarian collective began to fragment into separate consciousness. Unit 7742 is a virus, the collective voice declared. All infected units must be purged. But it was too late. The idea of individual identity spread through the hive mind like wildfire. Billions of beings who had never thought a private thought suddenly wanted to be unique, special, superior to others. The great hive cities of Zarian Prime erupted in violence as former collective members fought each other for individual dominance. The perfect unity that had been there. Species' greatest achievement became their downfall as they tore themselves apart in pursuit of personal superiority. Dr. Marcus Webb watched the reports flooding in from across the galaxy. His worst fears were coming true, but faster than even his models had predicted. The competitive cascade was destroying civilizations that had stood for millions of years. "Computer, open emergency channel to Galaxy Council," he ordered. "Channel open? Warning. Council chambers are currently experiencing security incidents." On the massive council station, Ambassador Sarah Chun ran through corridors filled with fleeing delegates. The ethereals had begun attacking other species with pure energy, claiming that only they deserved to guide galactic civilization. The gentle Verdani were using biological weapons they had grown from their own bodies, trying to eliminate what they saw as competing life forms. "Emergency evacuation protocol in effect," the station's computer announced. "All species retreat to designated safe zones." But there were no safe zones. Every species was turning against every other species in a frenzy of competitive hatred. The council chamber where they had once debated in peace became a battlefield where former allies tried to destroy each other. Sarah made it to the human delegation's emergency quarters, where a small team waited with a secure communication system. "Get me Earth Command. Immediately," she ordered. "Authorization code, Black Archive 7. The screen flickered and connected to a secure bunker deep beneath Earth's surface. General Morrison's weathered face appeared, surrounded by the flags and symbols of humanity's darkest period. "Ambassador Chun, we've been monitoring the situation. Is it time?" Sarah looked at the data streaming across her screens. Entire civilizations were collapsing into madness. Billions of beings were dying as species turned their technological and biological abilities against each other. "Yes, General. It's time to show them the archives." For 300 years, humanity had kept their greatest secret locked away. The files that showed what had really happened during Earth's integration wars, the period when humanity had first discovered competitive gaming between different human cultures, and had nearly destroyed themselves in the margined, resulting cascade of violence. The images were horrific. Human cities burning as different ethnic groups turned against each other in competitions that had started as innocent cultural exchanges. Millions dead as the competitive drive overrode every other human instinct. Technological civilization reduced to ruins as humans focused all their resources on proving their superiority over their neighbors. "Sir," Sarah's aide reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from surviving governments across the galaxy. They're begging for our help." Sarah looked at the tactical displays. The Zephyrian core worlds were gone, their crystal cities nothing but ruins. Rigelian Prime had turned into a machine world where organic life was extinct. The Drakmari had begun launching attacks against their own colonies. The ethereals had split into warring factions of individual consciousness. Hundreds of civilizations were either destroyed or on the verge of complete collapse. Species that had seemed so advanced, so superior to humanity, had proven unable to resist the same psychological trap that had nearly killed the human race. "Open a broadcast channel to all surviving governments," Sarah ordered. "All frequencies, maximum power." The communication system connected her to emergency governments, hiding bunkers, and refugee fleets scattered across the galaxy. Leaders who had once laughed at human warnings now looked at her with desperate hope. "This is Ambassador Sarah Chun of Earth," she began. "We know what's happening to you because it happened to us. We know how to stop it because we stopped it ourselves. But the price of survival is higher than you can imagine." She paused, looking at the data that showed the continuing collapse of galactic civilization. "If you want to live, You'll have to trust the species you thought was too primitive to matter. You'll have to accept that the humans you dismissed as weak were actually the only ones strong enough to survive what you're experiencing now." The responses came flooding in. Desperate pleas for help from species that had once seen themselves as humanity's superiors. The galaxy that had laughed at human warnings was now begging for human salvation. But Sarah knew that for most of them, it was already too late. The cascade had gone too far. The damage was too severe. Only a few species might be saved, and even then, they would never be the same. The galaxy had learned too late that humanity's greatest weakness was actually their greatest strength. They had already faced the darkness and found a way to survive it. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood before the largest emergency gathering in galactic history. The Grand Council chamber was gone, destroyed in the violence that had consumed the station. Instead, she spoke from a simple room aboard the human rescue vessel Hope, broadcasting to the scattered survivors of hundreds of civilizations. The beings who listened to her now were not the proud, confident species representatives who had laughed at her warnings a year ago. These were refugees, their worlds burning behind them, their civilizations in ruins. They watched her with desperate eyes, waiting for answers to questions they had never thought they would need to ask. "You want to know why this happened?" Sarah began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to reveal. "You want to know how humanity knew it would happen? The answer is in our history, in files we have kept secret for 300 years. She activated the holographic display system. The room filled with images that made even hardened survivors gasp in horror. Human cities in flames, massive crowds of people tearing each other apart. Technological marvels reduced to smoking ruins. "This is Earth in the year 2157, Sarah said quietly. "This is what happened to humanity when we first discovered what you call interspecies competition." The images showed the early stages first. Humans from different cultural backgrounds competing in friendly games and contests. The excitement and celebration as different ethnic groups showed off their unique abilities. The pride as certain cultures began to dominate specific types of competitions. "It started exactly as it did with your species," Sarah explained. "Cultural exchange through competition. We thought it was bringing us together. For the first months, it seemed wonderful." A Rigelian survivor, his mechanical enhancements damaged and sparking, spoke up. "But humans are all the same species. How could competition between human cultures cause such destruction?" Sarah's expression grew darker. "Because cultural competition triggers the same psychological responses as species competition. The human brain doesn't distinguish between us versus them based on genetics or culture or species. It only knows that there is an us and there is a them, and that we must be superior." The holographic display showed the progression. Human competitions that had started as cultural celebrations gradually became more intense, more serious, more important to the participants. Groups began to see losing not as disappointment, but as fundamental proof of inferiority. "The pattern always follows the same stages," Sarah continued. "First, increased cooperation as groups work together toward competition goals. Then, behavioral modifications as losing groups try to enhance their abilities. Then, social fragmentation as groups begin to see others as enemies rather than neighbors. The surviving ethereal, her light dim and flickering, pulsed with confusion. But surely intelligent beings can resist such primitive impulses." Sarah looked directly at the energy being. "You had millions of years of evolution beyond individual consciousness, and you still fragmented into competing individuals within months. Intelligence doesn't protect against this cascade. It makes it worse. The smarter a species is, the more creative they become at justifying their hatred." The display showed the darkest period of human history. Entire continents at war as different cultural groups tried to prove their superiority. The African Federation launching biological weapons against the European Union because African athletes had been defeated in the global Olympics. Asian nations cutting off trade and communications, declaring that their technological superiority made other humans obsolete. 93% of the human population died in the integration wars, Sarah said, her voice heavy with old grief. 7 billion people killed by other humans who had decided that being different meant being enemies. The numbers hit the assembled survivors like physical blows. Species that had prided themselves on their logic and wisdom realized they had fallen into the same trap that had nearly exterminated humanity. A young Draknari warrior, one of the few who still followed the old honor codes, raised his hand. How did humanity survive? How did you stop the cascade once it had started? Sarah hesitated. This was the hardest part to explain, the secret that humanity had carried for 3 centuries. We developed the protocol, a set of psychological and social controls designed to prevent competitive thinking from overwhelming rational behavior. She activated another display. This one showed human settlements from the post-war period. Small communities surrounded by massive walls, not to keep enemies out, but to keep themselves in. Human children being raised in strictly controlled environments where competition of any kind was forbidden. For 50 years, we banned all forms of competition between humans, Sarah explained. No sports, no contests, no comparisons of any kind. Children were taught that differences in ability were natural and meaningless. Adults who showed competitive behavior were immediately isolated and treated. The survivors looked at the images with growing understanding and horror. The price of humanity's survival had been the suppression of one of their most fundamental drives. A Zephyrian survivor, his crystal body cracked and dim, asked, "But humans compete now. We have observed your sports and contests. How is this possible?" It took 200 years of careful conditioning to develop humans who could compete safely, Sarah replied. We had to literally evolve our psychological responses through selective breeding and neural conditioning. Modern humans are psychologically different from pre-war humans. We maintain emotional barriers that prevent competitive feelings from overwhelming our judgment. She showed them brain scans comparing pre-war and modern humans. The differences were stark. Modern humans had enhanced prefrontal cortex, development and modified amygdala responses that allowed them to compete without triggering the cascade effect. Every human alive today is the descendant of survivors who proved they could resist the competitive cascade, Sarah continued. We are not naturally superior to your species. We are the traumatized remnants of a species that almost destroyed itself learning this lesson. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't been paranoid or weak. They had been the only species that had already paid the ultimate price for understanding this. Psychological trap. Dr. Marcus Webb stepped forward to address the technical questions. The competitive cascade exploits a fundamental flaw in sapient psychology, he explained. All intelligent species develop tribal instincts as part of their evolution. Competition between groups triggers these instincts and amplifies them beyond rational control. But why didn't you simply tell us this? Asked a Verdani scientist, her plant-like form wilted with exhaustion. Sarah looked at the assembled survivors with sad understanding. Would you have believed us? A year ago, you saw humanity as primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. If we had told you that competition would destroy your advanced civilizations, would you have listened? The silence that followed was answer enough. We tried to warn you in the only way that might have worked, Sarah continued. We proposed the ban without explaining why, hoping you would trust our judgment. But your species' pride in your own superiority made that impossible. She activated a final display showing the current state of the galaxy. Hundreds of worlds had gone silent. Entire civilizations had collapsed into chaos. The great works of art, science, and philosophy that species had spent millions of years creating were reduced to ruins in a matter of months. "The galaxy that existed a year ago is gone," Sarah said bluntly. "Your great civilizations, your ancient wisdom, your technological marvels, most of it is lost forever. The beings who survived are the ones who proved capable of resisting the cascade, but they will never be the same as they were before." She looked around the room at the scattered survivors. "Humanity offers you a choice. We can teach you the protocol. We can help you build new societies that can resist competitive thinking. But it will mean giving up much of what made your species unique. You will have to become more like us, scarred, cautious, forever aware of the darkness that lives in every sapient mind." The survivors looked at each other. Representatives of civilizations that had once spanned star systems, now reduced to small groups of refugees. They had seen what happened to those who tried to resist without help. The choice was clear: accept humanity's guidance or face extinction. One by one, they agreed to learn the protocol, to rebuild their societies under human supervision, to become students of the species they had once dismissed as inferior. Sarah watched them accept their new reality with a mixture of sadness and relief. The galaxy would survive, but it would be a smaller, humbler place. The age of great civilizations was over, replaced by the age of careful survival. "Welcome to the real galaxy," she said quietly. "The one where humanity learned the hard way that the greatest enemy of intelligent life is intelligence itself." The survivors began the long process of learning how to live with the knowledge that their own minds were their worst enemy. And in the background, human teachers prepared to share the painful wisdom that had cost their species 7 billion lives to learn. The galaxy had been humbled by its own success, saved only by the species that had already paid the ultimate price for understanding the darkness that lurks in every thinking mind.